Well, I am back in the greenhouse, and today we are going to talk relatively briefly about saving parsnip seeds. Now, if we go back to the previous video we just did as part of this sort of seed saving series, we were talking about carrots. And of course, carrots and parsnip are very similar. They're very closely related. Not the same species though, but there's a lot of principles that are the same. And the big one here that's really the same is the separation distances are pretty big. With parsnip, it's about 1.5 to 2 kilometer separation distance from other parsnips. Similar to carrots, if you live in an area that doesn't have a wild counterpart, which in our case where we are is wild parsnip, you only really need to worry about other cultivars, and so that's not too bad. But where we live, the wild parsnip, which is the same botanical species, is really quite abundant. And again, as I'll show you, it grows in our gardens and around our gardens and around our property. And if you live in Eastern Ontario, it's probably not that far from you. Wild parsnip is notorious for its the reactions that it causes in people. That being said, all parsnip roots are technically edible. But we're going to come back to that as another video because this is seed saving. So the one big issue with parsnip is of course this separation distance business, and that means that you need to keep it approximately 1.5 to 2 kilometers from another flowering domestic parsnip, which is not unreasonable. That's not a lot of people save parsnip seeds, but you also need to keep it away from the wild parsnip, which is a lot harder. Now, another thing to consider that is different about parsnip versus carrot is parsnip isn't known for having a long shelf life as a seed, so it's something that you kind of need to do fairly regularly. That being said, they produce a lot of seeds, a lot of seeds, which is why the wild version, the unimproved version, is so common, because it will spread like crazy given the right conditions. So I'm going to we're going to take a quick look at a wild parsnip that's growing right beside one of our garden beds. So here's a nice looking wild parsnip that's coming up. So just like carrot, parsnip is a biennial, which basically means you plant it the first year and you will have to overwinter it to have it go to flower and eventually seed the second year, and then of course it will die. So that's another consideration. So all said and done, and the reason why this is going to be a very short video is parsnip is very similar in its difficulty level to carrots for almost the exact same reasons, and it may be one level up depending on where you are in the world. Because if you have the wild version of it, you've got an even greater separation distance than carrot has from its wild counterpart, Queen Anne's lace. The wild parsnip is edible. Now, we won't go into any details, but essentially for us, given the amount that we use parsnip, we just use the wild version for our needs, and it works pretty well. So this is kind of an example of one of those really difficult species, and it's to save seeds from, and it's mostly because the wild ancestor is so prevalent in parts of the country. If you don't have the wild parsnip in your portion of the world, obviously you only need to keep this the 1.5 to 2 kilometers from another cultivated parsnip. So in a case like that, this is a lot easier, and I do know, unlike Queen Anne's lace, wild parsnip is not as prevalent in some areas. Definitely food for thought, but it's another one of those extremely difficult for a variety of reason type vegetables. So that's kind of our discussion on parsnip. A lot of the same issues obviously apply to parsnip that apply to carrots, so we're not going to go back through a lot of that in detail. This is just kind of a very brief, because we had a question asked about parsnip, and we figured, well, we'll answer that question, and we'll also show you what our solution here is because of our conditions. If we didn't have these conditions, we would probably try to grow an improved variety, but for us, When I say it this way, it's almost a lost cause, because parsnip is even more cold hardy than carrots. So trying to get a jump on the wild Queen Anne's lace to grow carrot seeds is one thing. Trying to get a jump for us on the wild parsnip to grow parsnip seeds is kind of a totally different matter. So anyways, hopefully you find this interesting.